Amanda. So I'd like to take this chance to really thank all of y'all again for everything y'all contributed throughout the year. Even though some of y'all didn't really join block reps and were forced into it, y'all really still gave it your all the entire year, which I really appreciate despite everything else y'all had on. So thank you for being so participative, especially from our first responsibility, which is fire drill, for spending the entire one night to make sure that our hall is safe. And for our second mission, which I probably think is the most important, is designing and creating the block tee, which really gives identity to every single block. So from 36, thank you Yuan, Lionel, Gab and Hui Ling for designing this shirt. 37, Kimberly, Kang Qing and En Ting for designing this 37 shirt. 38, we have Dory, Yongchen, Farid and Eunice. 39, we have Cliff, Shreya, Narissa, Ashra, Joanne, Douglas for this. And last but not least, we have Block 40, Alvis and Ivy creating this shirt. So yeah, I know you all really put a lot of efforts for the shirt and a lot of thought into it, and I think the residents really appreciate it because it really gives identity to each block. And last but not least, I would like to thank you all for also putting in your all for the entire block barbecue, which just happened here last night. Yeah, y'all really came down the entire night to help the residents cook, to help your blockmates cook. And special thanks to Shiya and Lionel for creating the really nice block barbecue poster. Special thanks to the games team, Kimberly, Yuan, Eunice, Alvis and Narissa for really adding a little something special to the regular block barbecues that we have. And also to end it off is to thank you all for really being very responsive in the block chats, where residents give complaints or where they have any questions, you all really reply as fast as possible. And I think that's the most important, which is to have the heart to help residents when they are in need. So I hope you all had a great year as block reps, and I hope to see you all next year as a fellow block rep. Yeah? Bye-bye!
Hi, Subcommers. Thank you for carrying all the logistics back to NTU. Without all of you, I won't be able to carry this logistics back. And even those who don't drive, thank you for collecting the logistic around school with me back to NTU and distributing them to the residents. Those efforts might be small, but I appreciate all your efforts that you have put in. Hope you learned something from the experience. Love ya!
Hello welfare subcommers. I would like to take this time to thank you guys for coming down and helping me out throughout this whole journey. Firstly, I would like to thank those who come down every Monday night to help out with the bread and milk deliveries. And I'm sure the residents really appreciate you guys delivering the bread and milk to their doorstep. Nextly, I would like to thank those who sacrificed their holidays and coming down to support during IHG. And I don't think we could have done so much and attend to the players' needs as well as we did last season without you guys. Lastly, I would like to thank those that came down and helped out during exam welfare giveaway. And I would like to wish you guys all the best in your finals and future endeavors. And see y'all at the next bread and milk deliveries. Bye bye.
Hi PNP! So yeah, we'd like to thank all of you for coming down during IHG to actually help us cover all the events, from waking up really early, like at 7 AM sometimes, to actually coming down to helping with all the coverage, especially even through difficult times like during the soccer match against Hall 12 when we had to run for shelter and then like grab umbrella so they could continue to carry the event. Really thank you for sticking through with us and pushing through despite some of the rigorous days when we had like 4 games a day to cover, that sort of thing. Yeah, we really like to thank y'all for your perseverance on that.
So beyond just IAG, we also like to thank you for helping us cover events. We appreciate your effort to come down and help us document our hall life and show everyone what makes Hall 7 an awesome place to live. We know that by documenting this, you'll be sacrificing your own experience of the event, but thank you for doing that, and in that way you help us serve the hall. Even though some of you may not feel very confident in documenting and taking pictures, we'd really like to thank you for still coming down, trying your best, and we hope that this PNP experience has been an experience where you learn a lot, and hopefully this is an experience you won't forget in the future. So thank you!
Yep, all the best, and we'll see you around. Bye bye.
Hi guys! So firstly, I'd like to thank all of you for joining my subcom. So when I first started my RE, right, I myself was quite unsure of what really to do because it's a relatively new role. But thanks to you guys guiding me through, we managed to do things like smartphone photography, or go for all the RE events that you help out with. Honestly, for the smartphone photography wise, if it wasn't for you guys helping me with my proposal, then I wouldn't have been able to done it because it was quite a big event and especially with all the administrative work behind it. Without you guys making the proposal, it really wouldn't have been done at all. So I'd like to thank all of you for that. Also, for all the different RE events across the halls, I also like to thank you for fulfilling Hall 7's duty regarding that, because without you guys, I wouldn't have been able to cope myself. I would have literally died lah. So I really thank you all for going for all the events, helping out in the events, covering for me when I'm not there. So yeah, thank you guys for that. So hopefully now that our residential education is in Hall 7, hopefully you can continue on, make more student-initiated ideas or more things you want to share with the residents. I'm sure the future batches will enjoy also, especially if you have any new ideas. I'm sure, like for example, Li Qing, you have some ideas, right? You can share out also. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, yay! Hi social subcom. So welcome on board to my private street because we had no events for one full semester and then y'all didn't really know what y'all signed up for. But really thankful that y'all actually trusted me, and then with CNI being our only event so far, but it's okay, we're gonna have more events in the future together. It was a very refreshing chance and the opportunity to actually work with all of you. And like thank you for like tolerating like my random meeting jokes, and then like sometimes where we had to like come out with something like really urgently, like everyone actually helped out each other with it. And like for programs, like we have like Alvin, Elvis, Kim, Yuan, Vivian. You were actually like the first group to start work, because like in our first meeting and we're like, you know what, you're gonna form the first portfolio. And then so really thankful for like the really smooth event flow. And then for food, we have like Rachel and like Julian. Like thank you for like buying so much food and then planning out for like all the food within like a short time span, and to feed us with so much food that I believe everyone was like really full on that day. And then lastly, we have like Liz for deco. And then despite being a one-man team, like you really did like a really super ups deco. So like everyone was like so impressed. So like this being our first event, it was actually very memorable. And like I hope that, you know, like we can actually do even more together, because like we still have like the rest of the subcom that hasn't appeared yet. So the rest of y'all, please appear for the other events. And like yeah, that's all. Love y'all.